Welcome to the Movie Geeks United Oscar Series 2012. In this episode, we speak with master editor Thelma Schoonmaker, who's received her 7th nomination for her stellar work in Martin Scorsese's Hugo. In this snippet of our conversation with Miss Schoonmaker, she discusses that film and a few others that grace her resume. You can access the remainder of this interview and our library of Academy Award nominee interviews and additional content at moviegeeksunited.net/Oscar.
I was listening to the radio, and they were saying, before the announcement, they were saying, Departed and The Artist, they're going to get all the nominations, and there's a couple of films that might get a few, like Hugo, and they had us number 6 in line. And then I got up and made my breakfast, and I heard Martin Scorsese's Hugo wins 11 nominations, and I shrieked out loud because it was so lovely to that many. Is amazing, and it's the most we've ever gotten. And also, the great thing about it is that we have such a lovely crew that works all the time with Marty, and we're very dear friends. It's like a big family. So that means that every member of the family almost was recognized, and that was really lovely, except for the actors, and makeup, I think. But to have all of the people that I work so closely with, be recognized, it's really lovely.
Well, I would think that the recognition for this film is particularly special because it is about the love of film and passing that on to a new generation. I mean, it's very meaningful.
Absolutely, and we were quite stunned at how wonderfully children reacted to it. It's not just a children's film. I mean, one of the things we're trying to make clear now is that it's very much for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
I think some people didn't go see it because they thought it was just a children's film, but it's not. It's much, much more than that, and everybody enjoys it. So, but we were rather afraid at first that when we first showed it to children, that they would be throwing popcorn and texting each other, and it was pretty scary. And they were just riveted to the screen. It was wonderful to see. I mean, Scorsese and I sit in the back of the audience because we talk to each other all during screenings because we're still editing and making changes, and we say, let's drop that, let's tighten that. And just looking forward at the kids, nobody was moving. I mean, it was unbelievable. And then afterwards, in the cards that they write and tell us what they think, they just kept saying how much they loved the silent movie clips and the movie making, and they gave us incredibly high numbers, much higher than the adults, actually, which were very high also. But these were 95% excellent. And that was such a joy to think that the film was impacting them and reaching them. I think it's very important to try and, not to dumb down, obviously, and actually try and stretch the audience. And this was what was happening with these kids. It was wonderful to see. But it's also a distillation of all that Scorsese has done over the years to rescue the reputations of the masters who went before him, and how he brought Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger's films back to the world, and brought Michael back to the world, and had done so for so many directors and so many films, like the Egyptian film Al-Momia, which he restored. It's really a distillation of that, I think, this movie. So because we love film history so much, you're right that it was a particularly joyous film to work on.
Absolutely, and you're right. I mean, the film definitely encompasses all of that. And I was talking to Robert Richardson last month about Hugo, and we talked about much of the same thing. In that, when I was watching it, I was thinking about Mr. Scorsese when he grew up, and the movies that he watched that led him to want to become a filmmaker. And I was thinking maybe someone of the new generation coming up will be watching Hugo, and they will be inspired in that same way.
Oh, gosh, I hope so. I hope you're right. That would be wonderful.
So it's such a beautiful kind of thing. But also, I mean, so many of Scorsese's films are about movie love. I mean, this one explicitly. So do you kind of find yourself immersing yourself in whatever kind of genre or world or particular filmmaker he's kind of paying homage to in some of these projects?
Yes, I mean there's always been something different for each film, by the way, but there's always been something that is sort of an inspiration for the movie we're making. And for example, in Gangs of New York, you may have read this. Marty wanted the opening fight sequence in the snow to be cut like Eisenstein's Chumkin in a certain way. There's a sailor who breaks a dish. He's washing a dish on board the ship after the crew has been fed food that's crawling with maggots, and they're furious about it and ready to revolt, and he sees on the dish, give us this day our daily bread, and he smashes the dish. And Marty said, look at the way that's cut. He didn't use the downward arm movement. Eisenstein instead, he used the up arm movement. He fractured everything so that the way the shots are used is almost like a plate fracturing. And it was a brilliant little moment, and he said, that's how I would like us to cut the battle sequence. And so we did. We tried to use things sometimes you wouldn't put in a film, like the blood on the snow underneath their feet.
Right.
Instead of actually somebody hitting somebody. There's a lot of people being hit, but and fractured it all and changed the speed of it, and that was all deeply influenced by Eisenstein, for example, just that one battle scene. And so there's always something in each film. He shows the crew movies before we start shooting, and that so that they're imbued also with that inspiration. And of course there were many films to look at for this one. So, and many little secret homages that are sprinkled throughout, actually, to films, which is really lovely.
Is it a difficult process? Because I know that you've also edited movies about documentaries with Mr. Scorsese about the history of, I believe, American movies and the British cinema. I think you're
we're doing
now.
The British now. We haven't finished it, but the Italian cinema was a particularly joyous one to work on. Those films, of course, of the neo-realist films of Rossellini and the men who followed him, Fellini and Antonioni. They were De Sica. They were enormous influences on Marty when he was a young child. You just cannot overemphasize how enormous those influences were, and it was a great joy to work on them and find a way to edit the clips so that the audience was hopefully feeling for the film the way they would if they saw the whole thing. And what a powerful period of filmmaking, my Lord. I mean, it just burst out of Italy like a thunderbolt. I don't know. I mean, it must have been the conflict of fascism and communism under which they were living as Mussolini was in power, and the desire to protest against it and not be able to must have been the crucible in which this great work was formed. And then the war, of course, just solidified that. And these masterpiece after masterpiece came out of that period. So it was
absolutely
such a joy to work on. I can't tell you.
Well, but when you edit, when you kind of pull highlights and different scenes and things from other people's work, such as Méliès for Hugo, is that a daunting process?
Yeah, well, it was very hard. It's always hard because our original edits on those montages of clips were like 4 times longer, you know, because there's so many incredible things that Méliès did, and that amazing sequence where he's throwing his head up into the music staff, that I would have loved to have put the whole film in because it's so brilliant. And even our visual effects person couldn't figure out how the hell he did it until he really studied it. But yes, it was very hard to cut down and remove things that we loved, and it is when we do the documentaries too. Of course, we would like to make them 15 hours long.
Well, particularly
my
with
my husband's films are very hard to clip because
that's what I was going to ask. Yeah.
Yeah, because films that he made with Emmerich Pressburger, his great partner, were so complicated and subtle, and they're not easy to convey to someone who hasn't sat through the whole film because they are so masterful. I mean, Scorsese's films in a way are that way too. If you have a filmmaker who's a little more cut and dried, it's much easier to pull a clip than it is from a film that is deeply felt and thought out and resonating throughout with very real truths about human beings. Because you know they don't have cliches in them. Cliches are very easy to clip. But since there are no villains in Marty's movies, or in certainly not in the films Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger made, there's never a villain. It's always in the gray area of human behavior, never the black and white. You know, Michael never saw life like that. He didn't. He always saw the complexities of human beings, and so there's never a villain, and there really is never a villain in Marty's movies either. So,
and with the editors that I've spoken to in the past, I mean, they refer to editing as the invisible art, but I mean, I'm very aware of the cutting in Scorsese's movies, but they further my investment in the film emotionally.
Ooh, that's a very beautiful way of putting it. Yes, he is a great editor. Editing has always been his passion, and it's his favorite part of filmmaking. And his early films his student films even show incredible, bold editing. And that has always been his predilection. That's why Eisenstein is so important to him. And so he and I really would sometimes like to slap the audience in the face instead of being invisible, you know.
Yeah.
And it's funny because sometimes I've been criticized by my peers. At one point somebody said to me, "Why did you do that jump cut in Goodfellas?" And my answer to him was, "Which one?" I mean, there were so many because we were dealing with particularly one character who runs the nightclub, and he was a person that Marty had seen at 2 a.m. in the morning on some very strange local show, and he said, "Oh, that guy is brilliant, I want to have him in the film," but he was not a trained actor. So when he was improvising with Paul Sorvino, he wasn't sometimes aware of what a professional actor would know to do at times, and so sometimes I had to make some awkward cuts, but the improvisation was so brilliant. Who cares, you know? But some people object to that, and if you go back through the history of film, you will find mismatches and bad jump cuts all over the place. So it's the least thing for people to be concerned about, as far as I'm concerned. We usually, you know, they used to do this thing where they would write up how many jump cuts we had done, or how many bad cuts they think that we had done in films like Goodfellas, and there were 300 or something. I don't know.
Please,
it's ridiculous. You have to do what's right for the movie, even if.
Well, that's it. That's it.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and I would think that the style of cutting a Kundun is much different from cutting a Goodfellas. I mean, the requirements
Age of Innocence is the same. Yes, I mean, we had to slow down when we did Age of Innocence. Of course, Kundun was a great joy to work on because we fell in love with the Tibetan people who were there, you know,